Let me please introduce Juliana Garaizar, the head of the Houston Incubator, VP of Innovation at Greentown Labs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Always a tough act to follow Barbara and Grace, but you know, this Greentown Labs is one of her initiatives, one of her babies, the way to engage the energy and tech community with startups, and I think you'll like what you're going to hear about us, and we would love to have you more involved. That's why we're here today. So I'm the head of the Houston Incubator for Greentown Labs and the VP of Innovation. And for those of you who don't know about Greentown Labs, we are the largest climate tech incubator in the US, and I'm pretty sure around the world, but we haven't been able to track the data. So we want to claim only the Americas at this point. But maybe that's something we can do with data. So it's been we're almost going to be 11 years old. You know, we were founded by 4 entrepreneurs who outgrew the MIT lab. They needed a bigger space for prototyping, and they decided to rent a basement in South Boston. And the landlord said, like, you know, I only need 1 check. That's the reason why Greentown Labs was created, okay? Fast forward 1 year, and there were 17 entrepreneurs in that basement, and they were to be kicked out by the landlord because the price were going up. That's when our CEO, Emily Reichert, found them, and she decided to take over the organization and bring them to Somerville, that is outside Boston, in the intersection between, you know, MIT, Harvard, and the other universities there. And fast forward 9 years, and we have 3 buildings in Boston, a campus of 100,000 square feet. And you know, we decided to open in Houston last year on Earth Day, our 4th building, first expansion ever outside of Boston. So we are at 140,000 feet of incubator. 60% of it is prototyping space. And then the rest is co-working space and community space. And our focus is mainly and solely climate tech, okay? So for those of you who don't know what climate tech is, it's any basically sector that is the biggest greenhouse gas emitting sector. We are trying to really tackle the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not only about green electricity, but it's also about anything that has to do with ag tech and water, energy efficient building, transportation, manufacturing materials, anything that has to do with circularity, and also resilience. You know, climate change is already here, so we need all the technologies that can also tackle the effects of climate change and protect our communities, and also the equity side of it. So overlaying all that, we have other kind of technologies that are, of course, not only platforms to sustain those hardware companies that are trying to build new things to make the energy transition happen, and data. So, you know, we have a lot of companies that are focusing on AI, IoT, robotics, blockchain, you know, carbon trading, carbon accounting. So really a lot of overlapping sectors. And in here you see quite a few of the logos of our companies that are working in those sectors. And as you can see, this is where the journey starts. The journey starts in universities like this ones. You know, many of our companies, mainly in Boston because of the closeness to the MIT labs and others, come from a university idea. There's a bunch of PhDs that, you know, have a very distinct path to Greentown Labs, and that's one of the things we are trying to replicate here in Houston. You know, in Boston, because we were created by 4 MIT entrepreneurs, everybody else followed, right? It's like, okay, it looks like these are the little milestones to get to Greentown Labs. So first is by the Energy Ventures course, and then there was an internal competition that is like a business plan competition they got some funding on. And then there was a little bit of an acceleration program, and you know, after that they got more funding, and that's when finally they got to us, you know. So our sweet spot in Boston has been companies from Series C to Series A, and we've been helping them with prototyping, pilots, small-scale manufacturing, and also getting them in front of investors to raise their Series A and following. And then they normally, when they come to Greentown, they normally come with an average of 2 people. They spend an average of 2 years. And they leave Greentown when they are an average of 15 people, and they need to grow and scale, and they need the space to make this scalability happen. In many cases in Boston, the companies that have outgrown our space have moved to the building next to ours. So we have a fourth extra official building that is actually owned by one of our landlords. And then they continue to be members. That's how we call our startups. They are alumni members of Greentown, and that means that they are still involved in the community, in our events, and more than anything, they still get our contacts. We really believe that Greentown Labs is this kind of bridge between startups, big corporations, investors, universities, and other stakeholders. And because 80% of our companies have a hardware component, it's much more difficult for them to get access to big corporations. Many of them, they don't know how to sell, or they don't know how to navigate these big corporations. And because we've been working with many of them for over 10 years, we have those entryways and those paths. You know, we have pilot programs with many of them. We have innovation programs. We even have created acceleration programs with some of them. And that's critical for us. So in terms of the numbers, what we have achieved in 10 years and a little bit more here in Houston, we're going to celebrate our anniversary on Earth Day, April 21st. So we have incubated more than 450 companies with $2.2 billion raised by our companies and 2.4 in terms of economic impact. But the number I'm the most proud of is this survival rate. 88% of our companies survive. Okay, if you compare it to other incubators and accelerator programs, they are on the 30%, okay? So this is not only because we are good at what we do, at connecting our companies to the right partners, but also because we're stringent in our application process. We have an ongoing rolling application process, and we have a joint committee for Houston and Boston, and we select based on three main criteria. One is the climate fit. The other one is like the odds of success, the potential. And the third one, which is one of our secret sauces, is the community fit. So we are trying to solve the biggest problems here. You know, we're trying to tackle climate change. And that means that, you know, a lot of the questions we don't know the answer to. And, you know, peer mentoring is kind of key. So many of our entrepreneurs, they meet on a monthly basis. We have our CEO luncheons. And they really open the kimono and they say like, okay, this is what's keeping me up at night. Sometimes it's a grant, sometimes it's like a negotiation with a VC, sometimes it's a prototype that is giving them a headache. And there's always someone out there that has gone through that problem and they can actually help. In Boston, some of the entrepreneurs we have gone through 4 different companies. They started as an intern in one of them, then they decided to go and get a job at another one, and they finally get their own startup together, and after that they become a board member of another younger startup. And that's the power of the community, and that's what we're trying to build here in Houston. If you see our member growth, every 2.5 years, we've doubled our members, and this is because we got a new building going. So hopefully this space will also be followed here in Houston, or hopefully faster than that. So in Houston, you know, we decided to come over. You know, and this is the space that we have here. We took over an old supermarket for old Mexican grocery store called Fiesta, and we are in the Midtown area of what we call now the Innovation Corridor, or also known as the Iron District. And this is when we opened last year on Earth Day. You can see the mayor there with our CEO. We try to host more than 50 startups, around 120 desks and 40,000 feet. Now, basically, we are at 64. So, you know, we never assumed that we would be so successful in getting companies in. And why we decided to expand to Houston, you know, let me tell you, it was a little controversial at first. And even some of our board members in Boston were not fully on board. It's like, you know, they're the ones who created the problem in the first place, you know. But we thought, you know, the first expansion for Greentown should be where we have the most impact. And in terms of climate impact, we really believed that we had to be at the global energy capital. We really believe that we can lead the transition at scale from here. And we also had quite a lot of committed champions who had, you know, really supported us in Boston, and Chevron, Shell, being the most obvious ones, and wanted us to have a presence here in Houston. They didn't want to have to fly all the time to go to demo day. They would like to come here to Greentown to see the companies here in Houston too. We felt also we were filling a gap. There was no climate tech, clean tech specific convener in Houston, although there were a lot of newcomers in the innovation space. You had Mass Challenge, who's been a longtime partner of ours. In Boston, we got a lot of deals from them that got into Greentown in Boston. Also moved to Texas. Same thing with Plug and Play, Capital Factory from Austin. So we really felt it was the right time for us. And in order to do that, we fundraised. So we needed 11 million to transform this Mexican supermarket into a climate tech hub. And one of the things our board told us when the mayor of Houston actually sent a letter to them asking them to do their first ever expansion in Houston to catalyze the energy transition here, they said okay, we will do it, provided only half of the money required to make this a reality in Houston comes from oil and gas companies. We need to make sure that this is not all about the oil and gas sector. It's a wider effort, and we want to make sure that tech companies are also involved. That's why you see Intel, that's why you see Microsoft, Amazon has since then joined us, and we really believe that data is critical to make sure we have the right information to make the right decisions. So one of the things, as you can see those logos here, the upper level are what we call our terawatt partners, and those have a direct access to our advisory board. So Barbara, of course, is there. She was the one who got the seed money to make this expansion happen, and that's why I was able to be employee number 1 for Greentown Houston. And you have, of course, representatives from Shell, from Microsoft, NRG, and BP and BHP, and then the other people who are not at terawatt level are luminaries in the energy transition, like Michael Skelly, who's, I don't know if you've read Superpower, but if not, I would strongly recommend it so that you can see how he transformed the wind industry in Texas. So this group and many of our partners, we don't call, here you can see sponsors, but in Greentown, we don't call people like big companies as sponsors. We call them partners because it's not money that you get to have their logo on the wall. This is the list of our problems. What we need them is to engage with our startups in a way that is constructive, and we can actually accelerate the path for these startups to the big corporation and to commercialization. So not only these companies are engaging with us because they want to have access to innovation and to these startups, and in some cases, they even outsource their innovation to us. But also, they want to see what the others are doing, and they want to partner with them. Houston sees the energy transition as a matter of survival. We don't want to become obsolete, and that means that companies that may have been competing in the past are now working together to try to solve this big problem. And since they've joined, they've used this advisory board as a sounding board where we think strategically about the energy transition and how to tackle it, not only in Houston, but also globally, because many of these companies have a global outreach. So as I mentioned, now we are at 64 companies in Greentown, Houston. We thought we would get 50. We are at 64. Many of them are startups, but some of our corporate partners also decided to office with them. As you can see there, Fluor, but there's also quite a few others that have joined us since, like Equinor. We have JP Morgan, and we also have Baker Hughes on top of VC Fuel, which is a new energy transition fund, and Texas Citizens Bank. So one of the things that we see also in Houston is that this typical sweet spot that we used to see from Series C to Series A has expanded. In Houston, everybody wanted to be a part of Greentown. So we got companies that were pre-seed that said, we have nowhere else to go, so can you please accept us? And we have companies that are past Series B, who still thought being part of the ecosystem, these companies would be maybe alumni companies in Boston, but decided to also have a space in Houston because they wanted to be part of the ecosystem. So a lot of, I would say, broader spectrum. Our companies also tend to be a little earlier here in general. And many of our entrepreneurs also, I think in Boston there's a lot of or PhDs that are trying to solve very technical problems. In our case, there's also a lot of ex-oil and gas who saw a problem during their careers that they now want to tackle, and they have the network. They also have saved some money so that they can launch that second part of their career, and they have a lot of connections. So I would say the age range here in Houston is a little older. We have more experienced entrepreneurs, but what is great is to see the kind of interactions and the kind of opportunities and synergies we've been seeing from Boston and Houston. Some of the Boston members decided to have a presence in both Boston and Houston because in Houston, that's where their customers are. Many of the investors who would only look at our companies in Boston are now investing in Houston companies. And we get a lot of these synergies going. And then it's been really, really interesting. And we had quite a lot of success. So this expansion got like a lot of media attention, and not only here in Houston and in Boston, but all over the world. I think, us coming to the energy capital has made a huge impact, and it was not the obvious choice, but we can see now that a lot of people are engaging with us, and these are some of our success stories that we have. Some of them have this link or this connection, as I was mentioning before, from the Boston-Houston connection. Form Energy is one of our biggest successes. They are past Series D. They've raised so much money that I lost count already. This was when they raised their Series C, so we still need to update this slide. They have their own space, but they still keep 40 desks at Greentown in Boston. And it's not because, they can't afford to have their own place. They do. But they want their staff to be part of the community, and also they like the flexibility we provide. And I think that's key to understand how we work. We work on a membership basis, so we don't take any equity, right? That means that when you come to Greentown and you become a member, you pay a membership fee that is basic, and that gives access to all of the services that we can offer. So connective services in prototyping, small scale manufacturing, you name it. This basic membership comes up with a desk attached, and then you have a drop-down menu of many other add-ons. So you can have different key fobs per desk. You can have up to 2 people per desk. You can have virtual access. You can have lab space per 100 square feet. And when you put all this together, you have to realize that normally a company that is Greentown Labs' typical company, that is a hardware company, would have to just rent a big space themselves with a very long-term lease, will have to buy the machinery themselves. In our case, that becomes flexible. Every month you can tell us, okay, I need this much space. So you can start with 100 square feet, but then you can go up to 3,000 if things go well. If then you have to regroup because of COVID, you can go back to the 100 square feet you started with, or eliminate the lab altogether. In terms of machinery, what we do for our machine shop is we poll our members and we ask them, what do you need? And if we see a critical mass, that's when we decide, okay, we're going to buy the machine. If not, if we feel like the machine is not going to be used so much, what we do is have a list of partners, not only universities that can give us access to their labs and machines, or maker spaces like TXRX here, but also, we have some of our corporate partners who may have those machines. So that's the second round of possibility. And the third one, when we see that there's no options available for them to have access to those machines, that's when, they can buy the machine themselves. And in many cases, when they've gone that route, they've also shared it with the rest of the community. So that's I think, makes a lot of the costs that would be fixed in many companies become variable, and that means that they can really allocate most of the fundraise that they have to be able to do what they need to do and focus on the innovation, focus on delivering on the milestones that they're required to deliver on to get the next round of funding or the next customer. So CCG is another one that is, I would say, our key company here in Houston. They have this new photocatalyst system reactor that doesn't need any heat exchange, so you can do catalyst reactions at this kind of temperature. And they're working with LED lights, and they're trying to get hydrogen produced. Actually, they've already produced hydrogen. So they're past Series B. They're working with pilots with Oxy and many others. Raptor Maps is another good example. That's a company that draws drone and AI maintenance for wind and solar. And Michael Skelly, our advisory board member, is also a board member of that company. Spark Charge is another interesting one. They do stackable batteries for electric vehicles. So when you're out of range, you can have a couple of those in your trunk, and you don't have to get stranded. They presented to Shark Tank, and they got money from them, and actually Mark Cuban is in their board now. So many, many interesting companies that are not only in the space of hardware, as I mentioned. There's others like Raise Green that they just launched their climate investment platform from Clean Energy Project that has been very, very, very successful. And then some blockchain companies like Topple, they are doing great in terms of blockchain and sustainability. So, I think there's quite a few ways for you to get engaged. I think, as I mentioned, many are trying to transition to cleaner energy. In our case, it's all about bringing you to the community. So there's several ways to do this. From going to our website and signing up to our newsletters. So we have a Greentown Labs wide newsletter, but also a Houston-specific newsletter where we showcase our programs. We have quite a few acceleration programs going on. The biggest ones that I think are super exciting are the Carbon to Value program, where we have companies that are not only capturing carbon, but doing something with it. And it's getting into its second year. Or now we're launching a Houston-specific acceleration program on April 4th. That is the low carbon hydrogen accelerator. And this is the first acceleration program. So let me tell you a little bit more about our GO programs. That's how we call our acceleration programs. As I mentioned before, we've been working with some of our companies for over 10 years, so we know a lot about what their innovation requirements are. And some of them said, let's focus on, finding those companies together instead of trying to make this innovation internally. And that's what we would do. We would put together a challenge and an RFP, and sometimes the challenge can be very narrow. With Vineyard Wind, for example, the challenge was they wanted technologies to detect marine life in order to put their windmills offshore. And what we did is we went for a global search, and together we selected 6 companies. Sometimes other accelerators programs have 10, so it's not as big as a normal 20 or 30 company acceleration program. We really select the companies that are already working on those areas. And then the acceleration program is longer than the typical one, so it goes from 6 to 8 months, because in general it has a pilot involved. And during this time, what we're trying to do is make sure that the startups understand the processes of the big corporation and try to make them work together. So success for us is not the typical success that we would have at a normal acceleration program where it's all about fundraising, right? In our case, it's much wider. So pilots are a good metric, but also joint ventures, license deals, anything that has to do with commercialization, getting them as customers to outright acquisitions. And that's one of the things we've been very successful at. And this LCHA, or Low Carbon Hydrogen Acceleration Program, is actually going a step further, the same way the Carbon to Value is. we are trying to create new ecosystems from scratch. So it's not only about the technology, it's also in many cases about the infrastructure. And that's why for the LCHA, we not only have Shell as a partner, but we also have EPRI, and we have the city of Houston, okay? So together with Greentown, we are 4 partners trying to figure out this systems problem that Barbara was talking about, right? It's not only about getting the technology, it's about trying to figure out the whole system and how it works together and how we can make infrastructure plus technology plus data work together. And that's gonna be happening on April 4th and 5th with an event at Greentown Houston, but it's also going to be hybrid, so you can connect there. Many of our companies need mentors, and many of them need to test their pilots and get data out of it. So they need big performing computers to try to simulate things and all that. So we need all the partners we can get. We need all the hands-on we can really get. And we really believe that, one of the things that, there's 2 important messages, and one of them Barbara already talked about, We don't know what the 10 years are gonna look like for energy transition. And, we need to have this learning mentality. The innovation that is gonna solve net zero has not yet been invented, So we need all the help we can get. Then we need the path from universities to Greentown to get shorter, And that means that we need to make sure how these incentives get aligned, And I think now a lot of faculty, they need to decide between tenure and their projects. And there's some universities out there who are deciding, we're not going to penalize our faculty for putting spin-offs out there, We're gonna let them continue to gather tenure and still, help them get spin-offs out in this world. And I think that's critical, and that's something that Carnegie Mellon has been very successful at. And when you talk to faculty there, some of the faculty there have 12 companies, and all of them have been using their PhD students to get them out of there. And, a lot of them very successful. That doesn't even happen in Stanford, So aligning these incentives and making sure that the path from technology to commercialization is a lot shorter. There's another thing that Barbara said that I think is key. We've been focusing so much on the supply side of energy, how to supply more energy that is greener and all that, but the low-hanging fruits are really residing on the demand side, 60% of what we can do in terms of climate impact is just energy efficient. We are so bad at consuming the energy, we waste so much. And the only way we can tackle that part of the equation that we really believe is the most important one is with data, I really believe that as end consumers, we are not empowered to take the most energy efficient decisions. And we need to figure out ways to empower the consumers, And I know some of our companies are trying, we have a few companies there that are great examples, like Footprint app that tracks your carbon footprint. So, you get a Fitbit, you should have a Fitbit of your carbon footprint out there, And it would be really great when you go to a supermarket, not only to see the calories that something has or whether it's sourced by fair trade, but also the carbon footprint, So once we get empowered with those decisions, I think we can really make things matter. And also, it's not only about the right thing to do, it's also about money. And, I think at some point, if we, transform the grid into what it could be, we can all be power generators, and we could all connect to the grid and use our energy that we have generated, in a smart way, but also, in a way that we can sell when there's peak hours and things like that. So I think there's a lot we can do to really bring down this huge black box that is energy consumption and efficiency, and make it understandable and make it more actionable for everybody. So with that, I'm going to end, and thank you, and I'm open for questions.